And so you may find that you have to differentiate your instruction even more. And the other thing that we really wanted to remind ourselves as we built the guidelines and to remind all teachers of that equity and access has to be considered with every step. So as we're making decisions about how we're going to deliver instruction, what we're going to expect from our students, to always review this through the lens of, do my students, again, have what they need? Are they going to be able to access this information? So now I'm going to just show you the web link in case you want to take a screenshot of where you can find the Returning to School During COVID-19 resources. And we have a new wellness doc that will be placed up there soon, and there will be more resources added to this site over time. And with that, I will remind everyone, if you have specific questions to the panelists, please put those in the Q&A, and I'll be reviewing those. And now I'm going to pass this off to our first panelist, Kirk Moss.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Kirk Moss, and it's great to share perspectives from the American String Teachers Association with you today. For more than 70 years, ASTA has provided national leadership in string teaching and playing. As a former national ASTA president, I can tell you now, more than ever, we need our professional association at the forefront. In addition to serving ASTA's task force, I recently had the opportunity to serve at the state level on Minnesota's Department of Health work group for music statewide. And I can attest to you today that ASTA's resuming instruction for classroom and studio documents truly represent the entire music profession at the highest levels. ASTA's instrument cleaning guidelines also provide helpful information for us. And then on a personal level, I recognize the complexity posed for mitigating risk in music and theater on the profession as a whole last May, and just have spent my summer immersed in the science literature of aerosols, refereed research studies, anything that I could read that may help us get to this point to go back in the fall and begin working with students again. Eventually, we're all going to end up face-to-face instruction. That's our goal. For some of us, that's happening sooner. For others, that will come later. But the most important principles for mitigating risk have remained consistent throughout the pandemic. And sometimes I find just because we know something doesn't mean we do it. So, you know, I'll hear from teachers at sessions a particular strategy, and they'll come up and say, you know, Kirk, I used to do that all the time, and I haven't done that for years. You know, these are things here. I'm going to share just 4 pillars that we already know, but we actually need to do this fall when we're in front of students. Number 1, hygiene. Rehearsals, classes, private lessons. Begin and end with hand washing, sanitizing, using an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. If we're concerned with transmission of virus from touching things, that virus has to be on our hands. So if we take care of washing, disinfecting our hands, that goes a long way toward mitigating risk for us. Distancing. Respiratory droplets, we know from a significant body of research, the larger droplets fall within about 6 feet. Now, the smaller ones, the aerosols, we're learning more and more about, they stay airborne, but the larger droplets are going to fall within 6 feet. So if we can maintain a minimum of 6 feet distancing, that will mitigate risk for us. It'll help. Mouth and nose covering, face mask. And I say mouth and nose covering because it's key, both the mouth and the nose are covered. We've seen research now that multi-layered mixed fabric masks can approach very high filtering efficiencies, even approaching 90%. So as teachers, I'd encourage you to find a mask that's multi-layered mixed fabric. What we're learning is not only does that mask protect others from ourselves, but it also can have some protection for us as well. And those multi-fabric masks can help with that. So everyone's in a mask, students, teachers, everyone is in a mouth and nose covering. Ventilation. The air we're breathing comes through a ventilation system, or it's natural air in our rooms and in our spaces. We're learning more about filtering. We've learned what MERV 13 building filters means. I never thought I'd know that minimum efficiency reporting value, MERV, and be talking about it, but that's key in our buildings. The air changes per hour can help us as well. How many times is the air exchanging? The Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins suggests 10 to 12 exchanges for music rooms per hour. That's optimum. And we're learning that HEPA air purifiers can help too. They're different, that's a different process, but they can help. If you're on the ASTA Connect, I just published a few things that I hope are helpful. Now, the big question we probably all have is, how in the world do I disinfect a wooden instrument? Well, in the short term, we really don't disinfect a wooden instrument, but we can clean it. And we can clean it with mild soap, like a dish soap if we need to. High touch surfaces though. So think for a moment, I'm picturing the days when I had racks of cellos along a wall. So I can take a soft cloth, just really mild damp, some mild dish soap, and give a quick wipe on that neck of that cello through that rack. I can follow up with a dryer cloth to make sure that moisture goes away quickly. Now, that's different than disinfecting, but soap definitely helps. And it's a process for chin rests or necks of instruments that may help for cellos and basses. Now, longer term, I'm telling you, it's going to be like Star Wars and a lightsaber, because eventually we're going to have figured out the UV technology to a point that we're going to have a wand and we're going to wave it in front of those string instruments, and like magic, they're going to be disinfected. Some luthiers have already moved to that technology, but it's not quite ready for our use yet as teachers or in school buildings. So as that develops, that'll be the next step for us through technology. And I'll leave you with those images of Star Wars lightsabers as we turn this over to our next participant. Glad to be with you today.
Hello, everybody. This is Steve Benham from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm really happy to have this time with you this afternoon. There's going to be a lot of overlap, obviously, between the hybrid approaches that many schools are using and digital learning, which Frank will be talking about in just a moment as well. But I want to first say this is an opportunity in the midst of our anxiety and worry about the year to say, okay, what can be done? What can we do differently to move ahead? And what opportunities are there to reimagine string instruction at this time? And I really encourage us to not try to replicate the face-to-face experience in a digital environment. It's very difficult to do. As we look at the suggestions that we have here on the next slide, you will see a few points that I'd like to point out. The first thing is, this is a chance for us to really emphasize self-guided learning. Don't you remember those moments when you said if the students just would practice at home like they practice at school, everything would work very, very well? And far too often, teachers rely on very directed instruction from the podium, and students aren't prepared to work at home. They don't have good skills. They don't have strategies for attacking practice problems and so on. You also don't have to answer all the questions yourself, right, as a teacher. This is a time, especially at the secondary level, to engage your leader students, your section leaders, those who are doing private instruction outside. Help them answer questions. Allow them to be involved in breakout sessions in online teaching. Help them to provide tutoring help and assistance for students. I would also say this is a chance for you to connect to your community at a greater level. Many of our students come from families that are musical families. Music making in strings doesn't have to just take place in the school. In fact, we all hope, I would think, that our music making would take place after students graduate from 12th grade or whatever the maximum grade is in the country that you are watching from. and make music all of their lives. Well, that music making may start in a place of worship. It may start in a community ensemble, community organization with other family members. Find ways, find repertoire for those students to be able to connect with those individuals in the community. So you don't have to be the only teacher. That's the point here. You can include other people to be the teachers, other students, other community professionals, other music makers, even amateur music makers in the community. So music making in the community doesn't have to stop. As we look at how this might look in terms of a curricular point of view, you want to consider expanding or diversifying your curriculum. Certainly, the music of either the European tradition, classical tradition, is a chance for us, is one of the foundations of what we do, but string instruction is so much more than that, right? So this is a chance for you to look at diverse genres of music that can be performed outside of a traditional full ensemble. I've heard a lot of talk on social media and other webinars. Oh, chamber music is a solution to all of our problems. Well, it may not be. Chamber music may be very difficult to perform with beginning students, but it's not as difficult to teach beginning students a fiddle tune that has a simple bass line or a simple accompaniment to it, and to perform that in ensembles. You'll want to look at additional, consider the different ethnic groups that make up your local community. Here in Pittsburgh, we have a huge Eastern European tradition that forms the bedrock of much of the music we perform locally, but we have a growing Latino community and also a growing community of musicians from Central Asia, from India, Pakistan, and others. So consider looking at all the various types of fiddle music that are out there. Turkish and Arabic Kakasi music, what wonderful opportunities for improvisation, the tamburiza music, and rock, jazz, mariachi, Latin, klezmer, and so on. As Kirk said a moment ago, we have resources within ASTA who are people who are experts in each of these genres, people who provide wonderful materials, compositions, concert experiences, online instruction resources, in all of these areas, and it's a great community and a great chance to learn from those experts in that area. As we look at the next slide as well, we want to talk about creating community, right? That's one of the major concerns that we're missing is, I saw a study on Monday of this week that the three major areas where students create community is in sports, in music, and in youth groups, right? Church and community youth groups. Well, music is hard, and it's not just about making music together, and a lot of us worry about, how I rehearse with an ensemble. What I want to say to you is some of the students love just to be in orchestra, to be with the teacher, to be with their peers. So allow your orchestra time to be more exploratory. Think about things you would do to create community, conversations, and dialogue within your ensemble. And that will connect with the next slide as well when you consider what you might do. Rather than the concert cycle, which drives much of what we do within the ensemble, let's look at modular approach to teaching, right? So what might be different topics that we could prepare or present to students? As a teacher, you can sort of semi-direct this, provide some ideas, and then allow students to choose. I have some examples for you on the next slide. One of them would be to say, okay, what if we included, in addition to whatever we're working on in our ensemble, opportunities for individual technical and musical development? One of the best teachers I ever learned from was the person who was my student teacher supervisor a long time ago. And as part of their instruction, every student in the ensemble received as well scale books, etude books, supplemental solo repertoire. It was a tremendous way for those students to develop their additional abilities. Consider a practice-a-thon, right? But not just saying, okay, I'll give you 20 points or whatever, you practice 10 minutes a day. The idea is, how do I practice efficiently and effectively? How do I set goals? How do I track my progress? What are the targets? And then consider a community event. Hey, if I practice so many minutes, we will fundraise and distribute that to the local food shelf for people who are in need right now, maybe raise money for medical work or so on. Consider music theory and history projects that are connected with selected repertoire. That comprehensive musicianship through performance, the CMP model, can be very effective for doing that. And again, improvisation. So many of our students would love to make music and be more be more independent. Well, improvisation is a great way to do that, and you as a teacher don't have to necessarily deliver that instruction. There are so many great YouTube links and online resources that are available for that, for students simply to play practice patterns and to learn different blues scales and different improvisation patterns. And then last, technology projects might include compositions and virtual ensembles. There are also apps available for technology. And if we look at the last slide here, I've just given you some just thoughts about technology that will lead, I hope, into what Frank is going to say here. There are a tremendous number of resources out there that have great recordings for you for solo, on small ensemble, large ensemble repertoire. You might be able to say, here's the piece that we're doing, and then look online to see if there are background recordings, look online to see if there are assessment materials. And these are ways that you can supplement your face-to-face instruction in a hybrid model for the digital learning part of your curriculum. Don't forget to assess. And one of the great things about some of these platforms is you can assign material, and then it provides assessment back to the students in a very timely fashion, and also sends feedback to you. So there are lots of great websites, web resources for that, as well as software tools. And finally, here is, there were questions about live performance. What can we do? That's one of the most challenging things to do because of the latency or the delay in the signal using the internet. Right now, there is some technology that exists that helps eliminate that, but we have found in some experimentation that there is still about a 10 millisecond delay. It's not quite as much as the human ear can discern, but it makes it difficult for large groups. You may have seen some smaller pop ensembles and other ensembles performing live. They use a piece of equipment that's several thousands of dollars to help facilitate that. And then it depends on the value of the microphones and the headsets that your students have as well. So what I would say is, if you're going to consider live performance, what you might consider is having a recording that's broadcast out through your platform, whatever you're using, and then have students play along with that recording at home for their family or for their parents, and they can do that in a synchronous fashion. So these are some ideas. The best ideas are going to come from our ASTA community, our ASTA Connect community, which is online, and I really encourage you just to share your ideas with each other. And just introduce now Frank and the great ideas that he have. I should also thank Creston Heron, Brian Kellum, and Jim Palmer for their work with our subcommittee. So thank you, everybody.
That was great, Steve. Thank you so much. My name is Frank Diaz, and I'm excited to be here. I'm very grateful to ASTA for creating this forum for all of us. Even in the last 15 minutes here, I've learned a lot listening to my colleagues speak about some possibilities and some challenges that are going on. I'll be forthright in telling you that Dr. Benham covered quite a bit of the things that I was going to talk about. So you might hear some things repeated, maybe emphasized a little differently. But I want to start with just sort of a little shout out to all of you. You're all working very hard to make this happen. I know all of you have significant challenges. I can tell you as a parent, my little girl started second grade today online and had a wonderful experience. Despite all our nervousness and all our anxiety, she had a wonderful experience because the teachers care about her. They care about what she's learning, and no matter what the technological challenges were, because there were some today, she was so excited to connect. So I want to start by talking about this online aspect of teaching with the idea that connection is critical. We really have to talk about that and making that a primary outcome. So I'm going to go through some ideas. I want to thank the folks that worked with me on this, Brian Coatney, et cetera. They're all on that list. I can name them all, but you can see the COVID guidelines. They really provided quite a bit of the information here that I was able to compile and put together. So first of all, let's just address the fact that today we will not be able to answer questions having to do with specific technologies, tools, and different things. Your school districts are going to be different. Your kids are going to be different. So, just as I think that's something that could be discussed later in follow-ups, but if we don't have a particular answer to your Zoom or Google question, it's because it's so different everywhere that we go. So I want to acknowledge that those things will probably happen later. But I do want to say that musical engagement, at routine and safety and community and growth are all something that we're concerned with. And what we have to think about is, how do we use the online medium to promote these things? So asking ourselves, are students engaged? How many different ways can a student be engaged musically? Is there some routine and safety going on? In other words, can they depend on you to have a specific set of criteria, modules, instruction tasks, things that are consistent from week to week that they're really going to need after a summer of quite a bit of inconsistency? I would also like to suggest that for anything that you're doing online, that you keep it neat, consistent, and not overwhelming. There are so many apps and there's so many things that you can do. I really do believe in this case, less is more. So whatever learning management system that you are using at your school, make it neat, make it consistent, and make sure there isn't so much that a kid's going to get overwhelmed by the amount of things. If you do have great technology to share with them, apps, etc., take your time. Maybe introduce one each week. Do a little bit of hands-on in your your online face-to-face meeting, so your virtual meeting. But try not to overwhelm people with too much information right away. Other general suggestions that I'd like to talk about is make sure that you're using the recording features on your learning and your LMS, on your learning management system. Almost all of them come with them. If you are a person that loves to model for your students and loves to create little videos, etc., these are great tools to use right away that can help alleviate some of the, oh my gosh, I've got to get so much instruction done and I have less time. You can use these recordings of you setting your instrument up, of teaching particular concepts. They don't have to be long. They could be 3 to 5 minutes. Please take advantage of that. It's been a really exciting feature for me as a college professor to use with my students. And I've heard from many K through 12 teachers as well that this has been very useful for them. I also would like to recommend that online be a place where you spend time just communicating as human beings instead of thinking as always that we have to be instructing all the time. Communication is instruction. What we model online for our students in terms of how we talk to each other, how we communicate is really, really critical. So I highly encourage you to think of that as a skill we're developing this year. All right, so kids are hungry for connection. I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions that I think are really critical. First of all, prioritize online time. So if you're going to be online, which many of us are right now, think about what works online that you don't have to worry about in an asynchronous situation. In other words, if it can be done asynchronously, don't worry about doing it online. What is specific about online? So here's some things that you could do that I think are really helpful in terms of instruction and content. First of all, you can invite some guests to come in. Having guests from your community, other teachers, other people around the country, the world who are willing to come in and talk to your students. I know this is a wonderful opportunity for students to engage with teachers and musicians from all over. I would highly recommend that you also engage musicians that you would typically not engage for your classroom. Piggybacking a little bit on what Dr. Benham was saying, you can have people that play instruments and styles that aren't what you would typically cover or that you don't typically cover in a classroom. This is a great opportunity to engage with a lot of folks who you wouldn't typically do that with. Master classes are great. You can break up, if you have a feature, have several people come in, break up your students into small master classes. So you can bring a fantastic violinist, a cellist, and a bassist, have your students divided into small breakout rooms, and engage the students in these small groups as often as possible. Again, theory and history, spending some time doing that is going to be beneficial to your students both intellectually and eventually when they come back and perform in a large group together. Composition, improvisation as well. This is a good time for us all to probably improve on our improv chops. There are so many resources available out there for that. Again, I won't mention any specific ones at the moment, but if you do a simple search of learning how to improvise, you will find a plethora of unbelievable information that you can use with your students. This is also a great opportunity to teach students to listen critically. So we can do a lot of online listening and using opportunities to bring in recordings and have students listen, assess, even adjudicate, right? Spend some time teaching them what those adjudication rubrics, how those might be helpful in guiding their listening. And also an opportunity for you to model for your students, right? So as long as everyone is muted and only one person is playing or speaking at one time, online teaching can happen, right? It can happen in the sense that you could still play, you can still perform. The lag is not going to be terrible from one place to the other if you're the only one performing. To reiterate what Dr. Benham said before, if you do want to have people play at the same time, in more than 2 to 3 people, having more than 2-3 people doing it, it is incredibly technologically difficult to pull that off. You need great bandwidth. There are ways to do it, and it is also incredibly expensive and time consuming. So if that's your outcome, I would highly suggest thinking about maybe thinking of a different outcome that might be as valuable and that might lead to a better performance later on, because it is really, it's weighing the benefits and the costs of trying to make something like that happen. Couple of ideas about structuring things online. If you have modules, as Dr. Benham said, you can have those modules be that students can select different modules. So there's some agency in what they can do. Those modules should be well structured. They should give opportunities for students to record themselves. They can still perform. You can still give them guidelines. You can still give them literature. You can still give them tasks. And they have opportunities to do little recordings where they can either get feedback from you or from other folks in your class. So don't be afraid to spend some of that in-class time for peer-to-peer evaluation or instruction or feedback, where you put people in small groups, say 3 of them play a solo for each other that you've assigned to all your 9th grade violins that week, and then they can all give each other feedback. And maybe when you gather up in a large group, you can have one of them play for the whole group that day, somebody who really wants to put a performance out there. So students still feel like there are performance goals that they're seeking. There's a way to get there, and that they have a performance venue, even if they're not doing it in a duet, trio, quartet, chamber music situation, right? They can also, as Dr. Benham said, there's also a lot of really fantastic software that they can use to record themselves with backgrounds and other tools that helps make those performances more like a real performance in some ways. For the asynchronous component, I think that this, again, there's so many different things that you can do here, but primarily thinking of the asynchronous component as things that can be self-structured, selected, where students have quite a bit of agency in what they might choose to work on, and getting feedback. You can do this in both, but that's really an opportunity to have them learn new things, provide them with new videos, have them learn new skills, provide them with videos of yourself playing and other people, so that they can have wonderful models, the kind of models that they would typically have in a classroom live, but just provided through a digital medium. I think I'm running out of time here, Rebecca, so I'm gonna probably stop here soon. So in other words, hopefully we'll get a chance to talk some more, but build community, teach other things, and think of the long game. We will be through this. One day this will end, hopefully, and we will be able to go back to very safe face-to-face instruction. In the meantime, there's a lot you can do to keep your students engaged online.
Thank you so much, Frank. Hi, I'm Laura Talbott-Clark. I teach violin at Oklahoma State University. And first, I want to thank ASTA for creating this virtual community for us today. It feels really good to the soul to be spending time with almost 600 string music educators. So thank you for being here. I also would like to recognize my most excellent colleagues, Emily Hannah Crane, Professor of Violin and Viola at Austin Peay State University, and Erica Schertz, Director of the Duke University String School, with whom I co-authored the private studio recommendations. I feel very lucky to have worked alongside such thoughtful and creative educators. So much of what has been said already can be applied to private studio teachers, whether you are affiliated with a school or running your own studio. In either situation, it is critical during this time that you advocate for yourself and your students. The immediacy of our relationship with our students allows us privileged access to understanding their experience of the world, while at the same time will create some special challenges for us this year. Although we might have to be physically more distant from our students, we can rely on the nature of one-to-one education to help foster a sense of community and connection in our studios. As you are deciding the mode of your instruction, if this is in your control, consider the location in which you will be teaching. Does it have adequate space to maintain social distancing? Are you able to ventilate the space, either using fresh air or ensuring that your HVAC has the adequate air exchange rates per hour? Can you time lessons so that you can ventilate the space between students and minimize contact? Are you able to eliminate shared materials and minimize high-touch surfaces that are not easily disinfected, such as items in a waiting room? And do you have sufficient access to PPE? Can you implement a health screening process for your students prior to lessons? And then finally, and possibly most importantly, what is your own personal level of acceptable risk? If you are teaching as part of an institution, push your administrators to ensure that these mitigation practices are in place and are clearly communicated to all. If you know you are teaching online, do not feel hemmed into replicating the in-person lesson format. Some students do better with shorter lesson times when online. Consider making up the content through different sorts of pedagogical engagement. Have your students submit videos for comments, start an online technique class, or invite guests to work virtually with your studio. Further strengthening regular communication with our students and families will help quell the anxieties of the unknown as well as foster community. Consider providing regular updates via a newsletter or scheduled emails. Before returning to instruction, be sure to clearly communicate all policies and procedures to the members of your studio. If you are teaching online, send specific details concerning tech requirements and preferred platform usage. You might even set up an extra lesson just to get the tech right before starting your instruction. Be sure to consider how you can protect your students' privacy and communicate this to them. How will you secure the online lesson? And what are your policies for storing recordings of lessons? Establish and communicate clear expectations for families about participation in online lessons. For beginners, it will be essential to teach the guardian along with the student if possible. Consider using the adult as your in-person representative when remotely teaching younger beginners. If possible within local health guidelines, a hybrid approach might be the best compromise for starting your beginners. When considering your studio setup for online education, the use of an external mic and semi-open headphones will enhance the sound quality. Investigate using an extra camera, your phone or tablet, in addition to your computer's built-in camera, to provide the student two perspectives of your playing for demonstrations. There are some affordable external USB mics that you can recommend to your students, as well as programs to use in coordination with Zoom or other online connection modes that will further enhance the audio quality. Reaching out to your colleagues for support and even virtual collaboration will boost our morale as well as enhance our students' experience. Remember that you do not have to reinvent the wheel. We have enough on us right now. Share online videos by trusted colleagues and consider making your own resources. Both of these could help compensate for the lack of hands-on contact, as well as serve as an important reference to guardians helping with practice. Opening the doors to our virtual studios when we offer special events and studio classes could provide an effective way of recruiting future students as well. Rather than trying to translate every element of in-person instruction, consider how you can use the inherent features of being online to create new experiences. This might be the chance for your studio to learn how to play with a click track, experiment with digital audio workstations, or even produce a virtual concert. Some composers are writing works right now that maximize the latency effects of Zoom so that our students can play together in a new way. They're amazing. Could we extend this composition challenge to our students? If we can broaden our concept of playing together, we can start to see what fibers hold fast. Listening and responding, sensing large-scale rhythmic pulse. These skills are still possible to experience together. And if this area is foreign to you, as it is to me, reach out to your colleagues and other organizations that might lend support. The psychological and physical toll of living life during this time is not to be minimized. We feel it and our students feel it. In our studios, we can meet these challenges with creativity and compassion. Denying the difficulties of what we are facing will not help us weather the storm. Take care of yourself in all of this. It is okay to not be okay. Let your students be how they are and give them that safe space to show up as themselves. Consider creating opportunities for them to connect via virtual mentorship pairs. Utilize online discussion formats to inspire collaboration. Seek regular feedback from students, whether in lessons or via weekly check-in journaling assignments. Not everything we do with our students during this time needs to be about music, but everything we do should be about connection and community.
Thank you so much to the panelists. I'm going to move quickly into the question and answer and get some of the repeated questions posed so that the panelists can speak on them. And I also want to share a couple things about what ASTA has coming up in the future. First, I really want to thank the ASTA COVID Task Force for what they've put together. So with having said that, we're going to do our best to represent what the task force was trying to communicate through the guide and also to answer some of these other questions. So I'm going to actually unshare my screen for a second and move into a panelist view. I think that will help with what I'm going to try to do next. First time for doing this, so bear with me just for a second. So we have some really great questions, and panelists, I can see all of you right now, And what I would like you to do is basically just kind of raise your hand at me if you would like to be the one to answer the question. So we have a lot of questions about safety. And the first question that's been posed is, what about masks with eye visors? Kirk.
So the eye visors often are referred to as face shields, of course. And even in the state guidelines, teachers often, now this varies state to state, but teachers often are permitted to wear a face shield. But the design of the face shield, just in terms of protection, is to protect the eyes. So that's really the key. So if you're working at a closer distance to students, maybe in a private setting, maybe in a class setting with younger students, then you could wear that face shield over your face mask, and you have both as protection. That's the true way to wear it as protection. If you're wearing a face shield by itself without a mask, then there's much more risk involved in terms of aerosol transmission, and you need to be aware of that. Now, in some cases, groups are moving outdoors to mitigate risk. So if you're moving outdoors, a face shield alone might be a mitigation technique. It allows the students to see your face, and it does give some droplet protection there. But at close range, a face shield and a mask is going to give you maximum self-protection.
Thank you, Kirk. Okay, Steve, I'll let you out. I just want to make sure we get through all the questions. So I'll take one more input on masks.
I just want to reinforce that the recent guidelines that have come out indicate that it's not just any mask, right? So bandanas, neck gaiters, they're less useful than a well-fitting mask. And so it has to be a mask that really truly closes off the sides, the nose, and the things like that. Not all masks are created equal.
Here's another safety question that I think really is an important question we're all asking. Are there limits to rehearsal time for face-to-face instruction due to the room air exchange rate? Is Kirk again?
Happy to speak in. So of course, the Colorado University research that just released from the coalition, ASTA is of course a part of that coalition, is recommending 30 minutes and showing that between 30 and 60 minutes, you definitely see an increase in exposure. Over 60 minutes to 90 minutes, you see another increase. You know, that of course said, it's not like with any of these things, there's some just magic line or button. It's all based on what we're seeing, what we're learning. So the key to mitigating risk is making every choice a thoughtful choice along the path. So whether that's 30 minutes, whether that's 40 minutes, to what extent are you distancing? To what extent do you have air exchange? To what extent can you get fresh air? All of those things factor into length, but length is definitely a variable to give strong consideration to.
Before I go on to the next question, the other piece of that puzzle is how long are you ventilating the space following a given rehearsal? And again, the University of Colorado Boulder study is kind of recommending a one-to-one relationship, and it's much more complicated than that. But you do want to aerate the space. So if you have students in the room back to back, you do want to try to build in time frame for the space, for the air to move through the space. This is also, so we have a lot of questions. I know our community is really concerned about shared instruments. And I'm going to say up front before we move into some of these specific answers that the answer to that question really is to reduce sharing. I know because my students also share instruments, how difficult that is. But in terms of instrument sanitization, the specific question is what precautions should be taken if kids are using hand sanitizer and then playing their instrument right away? Is hand sanitizer something that can damage the instrument? Okay, Steve.
I'll have a go at it because I keep looking at Kirk there. The finish on the instruments varies greatly between student instruments and what you're looking at for professional level artist instruments. And hand sanitizers also vary greatly in their level of alcohol content and what the specific composition is. So it is very difficult to give a blanket recommendation. What I would suggest is you check with your local music store or you check with your local violin maker to see what she or he would recommend and to go from there. There are, again, the amount of porousness of the wood, how thick the finish is, the varnish is, if it's a lacquer varnish, spirit varnish. I mean, there are all sorts of different types of variables with that. So it's very difficult to give a one-size-fits-all answer. Cleaning hands with sanitizer is a good temporary solution. It is not as effective as washing your hands for 20 seconds with soap and water. And the CDC guidelines say that any hand sanitizer should include at least 60% alcohol. That alcohol does evaporate very quickly, and I would not think it would cause immediate damage to the instrument that way. But hand washing is much more important than using a hand sanitizer.
Thank you. So this next question deals with copyright, and there are quite a few questions about copyright that have probably been answered in the chat as well. But does anybody feel comfortable speaking to effective ways to distribute music and not violate copyright? Steve.
The easiest answer to that is check with the publisher directly. Because even within various publishing catalogs, there are different rules depending on how old the music is, whether it's still available or not. And many publishers have made available electronic versions or e-versions of music. Some can be viewed only on tablets. Others can be sent as PDF files. And I know personally that publishers are working on providing more digital resources to the students and to teachers. So check with your publisher and your local music distributor. Generally, for educational use, if you have purchased the music, either in print form or in electronic version, you are permitted to have one student, one copy if you have submitted that for students. If you have, purchased that, enough copies for students. For educational use, the general principle is that you can study any work, but you may not reproduce more than 10% of that work for distribution to your students without having purchased it or received the appropriate copyright permission from the publisher. So the first step would be with the publisher. And the publishers are not going to like me saying that because of the fact that they get lots of emails. But look at their websites. Many of them have FAQs posted about just that specific issue right now.
Great, thank you so much. Now the questions are really rolling in. Here's a great one. Tuning came up in the pre-survey. Tuning has come up in the everywhere. Everyone's worried about tuning, and rightly so. I'm going to answer the first piece of this question. What about wearing gloves? The issue with wearing gloves is simply that if you choose to utilize gloves, you have to throw them away after every single item that you touch. Otherwise, you're just simply transmitting whatever virus was on one instrument to the next, and gloves could spread it everywhere. There's a great YouTube video that my university was making us watch on cross-contamination. And the biggest item that we cross-contaminate with is our cell phone. So we put on gloves and then we touch our cell phone and then we take off the gloves and then we pick up this and then we put it, on our face. It was a very scary video. So the next piece of that is, so what do we do with tuning? And any recommendations from the panel? Perhaps we can start with a studio recommendation. Laura, what recommendations do you have about tuning?
Sure. So I think it's an opportunity to teach independence in our students right now. So if they're not already tuning their instrument, this is the time when we're going to need to start facilitating that process. So I think if you're teaching younger kiddos who haven't started it, I would engage their guardian as a helper in tuning, and I would teach the guardian how to tune. I would also rely on some of the ASTA resources that I know are out there. There's some great past articles about how to teach tuning that you can access through, I think it's been in our journal perhaps, which would be terrific to help. There's some great things online as well that could help. You could send to the parents as a resource, just so they have that there at home. So I would think of it as creating autonomy in your students. For the young ones, you have to use the guardians. For older students, even in online ed, you can still work on tuning. It doesn't have to be synchronous. You don't have to link up with them. You can play a note, they can listen, they can respond, and you can help them with the mechanics of it. You're just going to have to be incredibly descriptive during this time, as well as reflective to understand how they're receiving the material from you. So asking them what their take was on what you just told them as well.
Let's go to Frank.
Just a couple things to add to what Laura was saying there. If you're starting beginners out and you're dealing with this, as you would typically have to do this in a classroom with a lot of students and doing one string at a time, if you're lucky, whatever you're playing with that day. One suggestion is if you can get them outside for small face-to-face in an outdoor area where you're not going to be out for too long, and you can bring their parent or guardian with them and model in front of them. So maybe you have a group of just a few students, bring your instrument, model what tuning is like, have the parents actually do it or the guardian do it so that they have an embodied experience of what that is like and that they can take that home. In terms of follow-up, what you can do, and what I would highly suggest is to make sure that the students actually have an opportunity to experiment with this, not only not when you're doing online instruction, but through having tuning tools on your learning management system if you're doing it online. So having strobe tuners, having tuning apps, have them give you a video, show you a video of tuning the A string, tuning the D string, and then you can give them individual feedback. So it's not just happening during your live presentation. They're also doing a little bit at a time and making sure that you give them good feedback and encourage them to do that one-on-one. You can have the parents in the video at the beginning if you want to help with that. So that's just a little bit to add to that.
Kirk?
And to put all of this in a broader perspective of pedagogy, one of the topics we discussed in our wonderful group with the task force is just, this is the fall where we have those tried and true things. And we know when a student gets to a certain grade level, we teach tuning. Well, this is the time to rethink the order of what we teach when and why. And in many cases, tuning will get taught earlier and look differently than it ever has before in our profession. And when you really step back from it, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we all have experienced trying to tune a student cello peg. Okay, we've been there. That's a whole different adventure, but I think this is a time to rethink our pedagogy. What can our students do? How can we support them in doing it? And what if we change the order so when we get those moments with our students, we can really make the most of them to maximize instruction?
Great contributions. I'm going to throw in almost an outlier response because I'm afraid that I don't have enough money to replace all the strings that might get broken in the process. And actually, I'm going to do what everybody has shared. My plan is to teach tuning right away, and we might just all find out that we're waiting too long, that we've all waited too long. Maybe you can do this much earlier. But I will say this, I teach in a community partnership, and we have very few resources and we don't have very many replacement strings. And what I'm going to do is actually have a couple backup instruments that have been, quote, quarantined. So I'm a huge fan of the notion of quarantining the instruments, meaning I'm going to leave them rest for a 1-week period. And across that time, if there were any virus on it, it should expire. So if a student instrument, the string breaks or it goes way out of tune, what I'm setting up is an instrument exchange where I have a backup instrument that I'm going to, they can drive by and ask in their car. I'm going to give them the instrument in exchange for their instrument. Let the instrument be quarantined. Then I'll go ahead and replace the string, tune the instrument, and then we can do another trade. So that is my plan. I know that's another resource issue, but I do have a few backup instruments right now because we're going online and not everyone's enrolling the same. Numbers aren't coming through. And so I'm doing the same thing with my university tech courses. When we switch instruments, we are sharing instruments. We're just stop playing for a week and then we're going to trade. And so we'll have a week of time where maybe we listen to something, and that way I'm not putting alcohol on the varnish. I'm not trying to disinfect the instruments. I'm allowing the virus to expire. We did have some questions about the UV lights, and I wonder if any of our panelists know anything about the UV lights. Kirk.
There's this technology is emerging so fast. It's like we've talked about, like Steve referenced earlier. You know, it's not a one size fits all kind of thing anymore. So in general, the professional associations are still cautioning for use of UV because of skin and eye risks that come into play there. That said, there are industrial companies that are selling commercial products specifically for rooms, and we actually are using them in our voice studios this fall, and we're among the first to use them. So it really depends, but what I would say is the typical devices that you would buy in a local store, personally, I would not recommend at this point in time. The luthiers that I know that are using them have built special ways to use them, and kind of a whole unique way to use it safely, and it's just not as widespread unless you're talking about a larger system that's commercially available for like an entire studio or an entire classroom. Those are very pricey, but they're pretty high tech. And there's a couple different technologies. UV is one of them. Ionization is another one. Both of those are becoming more and more commercially available.
We are really wrapping it up because we only have about 4 minutes left. And so we're going to do one last question to the panel about how can you create an environment where students at least feel like they're playing in an ensemble or making music with others. Frank.
So again, I think we have to rethink of what it means to perform something, right? The kids can still perform in a large group meeting. We just can't all perform at the same time. You can put them in small rooms, separate rooms, and have them perform for each other. There is some software available that you can use that's pretty easy to use, where 2 or 3 people can record themselves playing something simple for a short amount of time that's free, as long as you're using a click track. So one of your master classes could be teach people how to use a click track. This is how you do it. Here's how many takes it's going to get. Performance is still going to happen. It's just not going to happen simultaneously in any way that is going to be aesthetically pleasing to us. And that's okay. These other skills are going to really be wonderful. You imagine your students learning how to play, to a really clear click track, how much that's going to do for pulse when you get back and put them all together. I mean, this is a really wonderful thing. So just thinking, how many different ways can I get them to perform? Make Thursdays Performance Thursdays, where anybody who's been working on a solo or something else can play, get some feedback, share some information. That's some way to keep them going and motivated, I think.
Wonderful. All right, so I just have some closing things to share with the community. So don't duck out just yet, because what's to come, I am hoping we can provide you as the American String Teachers Association with more resources and more assistance. So thank you to the ASTA COVID-19 Task Force. You can find those lists of names from the committee on the ASTA website. Right at the end of this Zoom meeting, you're going to have a link that prompts you to respond to a follow-up survey. We would like to hear from you. We would like to hear about what your needs are, and our plan is to follow this up with an ASTA wellness resource, which is coming soon to our website, and webinars and conversations hosted by ASTA about topics that are on your mind. So if you fill the follow-up survey, we're going to be able to kind of meet your needs for what we offer next. Some deeper conversations about the things that you're concerned about. A lot of people during this webinar asked, will this be recorded? Yes, it will be posted to the ASTA website. Will the PowerPoint be shared? Yes, it will be posted to the ASTA website, and I'll add Frank's slide back in. I'm so sorry about that. And I want to tell you about the ASTA Connect community, which has come up over and over. The ASTA Connect community is for ASTA members. We have an ASTA curriculum, we have ASTA assessment, we have ASTA CAP. Now is really a time to be part of a professional organization. And I just want to end with a quick personal note about my own experience. We get asked often as board members, as ASTA president-elect, why am I a member of ASTA? And my answer is because it's a community. And I think for our own health, wellness, and ability to navigate this difficult time, having a community, having a large professional organization where I can network, connect, and gain resources from others and work together as a unit is really why I'm a member of the organization. We're here to serve, but we're also here to connect together. And so if you're not an ASTA member or your renewals are coming up, we really encourage you to consider being part of this organization, because now is the time that we really need to work together. Thank you so much for being a part of our webinar, and check out our website for more information to come. Thank you.